Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. This week's guest is a Filipina-American author, artist, and educator. She was recently published in Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future, Volume 37, with her story, Argentum, a dream that demanded to be told. She has published short fiction and poetry on the semi-pro scene for years. As she notes on her profession, she peddles Shakespeare to Philistines, aka high school students. Welcome, Anj Dockrey.
Hi, thank you.
So I recently met you as a winner in Rise of the Future Volume 37, and that's just great that you've actually made that achievement, which begs the first question. How long actually have you been entering the contest, and how did you first find out about it?
I think I've been entering the contest since about 2003. I was in college. It's been so long that I'm not sure how I found out about the contest. I either looked it up online or I read one of the books first. I'm not sure which came first.
Right. So that's a long time to be entering the contest. So do you remember how many entries?
Probably around 10 to 12.
I get it. And along the way, were there like honorable mentions and things like that?
Yes, I did get a few honorable mentions. I think it's funny because usually people get better with time and, they get honorable mentions later. I got a bunch of honorable mentions early on. And I think when Dave Farland became judge, I think that's when I stopped getting them. So I feel like I think I didn't get any honorable mentions from Dave until I won. So
I get it. So that's a bit of a different answer than when I normally get my title winners. So it says in your bio that you've lived in 4 countries and 8 states, and hope your wandering days aren't completely over. So let's explain that, how you started in the states and the countries, et cetera.
Well, I was born in the Philippines. My mom is Filipina, and my dad was in the Marine Corps. So they met there. I was born in Subic Bay before it closed, which ages me. And we moved to the States when I was pretty little. And my sisters were all born here in the States. So we moved from coast to coast from my dad, as he was stationed different places. And then he retired and went to work for the Marine Corps for the munitions department. And we were stationed in Nevada for that. And so I spent most of my formative years there in Nevada. And when I was a junior in high school, I won a scholarship to go study abroad in Germany. So, I went to Germany on the Congress Bundestag scholarship, and then off to college in a different state from there. And then I studied abroad in Japan during college, and then returned there after graduation to teach for 2 years on the JET program.
I get it. And then now you're currently teaching. You're teaching high school now?
Yes and no. So I'm currently taking a year off to be home with my baby since I recently had one. And I plan to go back either next school year or the school year after, just depending on how the pandemic goes.
I get it. So it was great, like I said, to meet you recently at the Rise of the Future week. And so I'm just, I'm interested because a lot of the audience we have for this podcast are aspiring writers or writers that need that little either kick in the pants or the inspiration to keep on going. So when you get started, did you do the online workshop that we posted an online workshop? It turns out to be right at the beginning of the pandemic. Did you do that course?
I did right before I came for the actual workshop.
I get it. So how was that different to the week-long workshop? Because it's there, you've got basically the same instructors, Tim Powers, Dave Farland, and Orson Scott Card, who wasn't here this year. But you have them giving the basic, I think, 10 or 12 videos, plus the 10 lectures, the 10 essays from L. Ron Hubbard. How did that workshop vary from the workshop that you attended?
I think it was good to have the online workshop first because it gave us a lot of really good information and tips about the craft of writing. And I think it was good to have it before, because then during the workshop itself, it could be a little bit more interactive, instead of just sitting and listening to a lecture, which again could be done online, as we've shown.
Right.
We were able to interact more with the instructors. There were different guest speakers that came in. So that was really neat. And we were able to critique each other's stories and spend a lot more time on that.
Yeah.
So we got to hear from each other.
I get it. So you found like doing the online course, because it's also for anybody that's not a winner. I mean, you got 12 people that get to enjoy this workshop a year. And we've had nearly 6,000 people so far taking the online course. So you comment a little bit more in detail, like the benefits of the online writing workshop, because there's a lot of people that are listening to this. This is their immediate avenue. They've got to get some of the benefits of the contest.
I would definitely recommend the online workshop to anybody who wanted to write short stories or write in general. The two things that stuck out to me about the workshop that were different from other writing workshops that I've attended before was there was a unit on suspense, and getting into how to create suspense in your story. We always hear, end a chapter on a cliffhanger, but this went into a little bit more detail on how to do that. And I've never been in a class where it covered that in depth before, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And the other was the economics of writing, and how to prioritize your time, professional versus hobby authors. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but one point that they made in the workshop was that if you major in English or literature, then you're trained to be kind of a hobbyist writer, perfecting this one story until it's, spending lots and lots of time on it until it's perfect and will win a Pulitzer Prize or, something. And, you can't do that if you want to earn a living at it.
Right.
So it just kind of went through, time is money for authors and how to up your productivity. And I thought that was very interesting as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's about 10 different essays from Mr. Hubbard that he had written in the 30s and 40s to help aspiring writers, and a lot of stuff from talking with Tim and Dave and Scott Card, that the stuff is as valuable now as it was when he first wrote it. Any particular essay you found that was your favorite? I'm
really bad with titles, but again, I think the one on suspense was my favorite for sure, because like I said, I hadn't just classes never cover that subject for some reason. And it's just so important. If you want to create a page turner, I don't know how many boring stories I've read from other, amateur authors in writing groups or, critique exchanges and things. So I think that's really the difference between an amateur and a professional is, can you write a story that makes somebody want to read it?
Right.
Who isn't doing you a favor.
I get it. That's good. Yeah. That's the name of the actual essay. It's called Suspense. So,
okay. So
yeah,
I got it right.
Yes. So now with respect to the workshop that you just attended, for you, what were some of the highlights?
I really liked getting to know the other authors who won, and then being able to read their stories. The 24-hour story, I think, was my favorite part. I had heard about that because I know some people who have won before. And, they warned me about that. And I was thinking like, oh, how am I going to write a story in 24 hours? I'm such a slow writer. But I was able to do it. It's not perfect. I have to edit it. But ending a story has always been really difficult for me. I'm one of those people who have a bunch of, half-finished stories. So being able to push myself and finish in that short amount of time gave me new confidence in producing work.
That's great. Any particular of the judges that were there that you were like fanboy, that you were like, oh my gosh, there's blank?
Well, it was pretty awesome to meet Kevin J. Anderson, especially as Dune was coming out. I didn't, get to interact with him very much, but, I've been reading him since I was a kid. I would definitely have fanboyed out on Orson Scott Card if he had been there.
Yeah.
I was disappointed that he wasn't there, because Ender's Game is one of my favorite books ever. So
yes, he just wasn't traveling at all this year. He's just
I figured.
Yeah. which is what we had with some of the judges. They just weren't traveling, and the foreign judges couldn't get in. Well, that's good. I know Kevin will enjoy hearing that, and I always like to continue chatting with Scott Card, so let him know that he missed another group of fans this year, because he loves the contest. He's been involved with it for so many years. Now, you wrote this story, The Argentum, and there's definitely a lot of philosophy in that story, whether it was intentional or not. But you said it started with a dream. So because it's a fantastic story, and it's great how this being, that got the people across, humanity across the stars to this new location and what's happening there. So you said it started as a dream. So can you elucidate in that a little bit more?
Well, the dream part was the first scene. So I'm a vivid dreamer. And so a lot of times I do the dream journal thing, and I'll write them down. And a lot of times I'll use the scenes and as information or inspiration for a story. So it started with, the dream was a scene on a train. And so a lot of the characters having a conversation on this train. And so I took inspiration for the atmosphere of the story from that. But you're right that it does have a lot of philosophy. So my best friend passed away a couple years ago of cancer. And we are of different religions. And so we used to have a lot of philosophical debates about religious topics, because he was a pastor and I'm Buddhist. And we were talking about, I guess, the nature of love and compassion. And I always thought that it was a human trait. I didn't think that, that could come from a God or a godlike being that had no capacity for pain. If you don't have capacity for pain, how can you feel sorry for somebody? How can you empathize with anybody? And, he believed the opposite. He believed that love came from God. And so after he passed away, I had a really hard time with dealing with my grief over that, and, depression and missing him. And so I sat down to write that story, and I just put it all on that page. And I wanted to put that debate in there and, explore it on the page. And that really helped me to process, my grief and, move on a little bit.
No, that makes sense now. The story makes much more sense now, having you just explained what you just did. Because obviously there was some story within that story, that you're able to write with such conviction. It wasn't just, I'm watching this train pass by. There's an actual experience happening with that story, which obviously is why you won, because it was a really, you told a really, really good story.
Thank
you. In terms of your direction that you're planning on going as a writer, are you more fantastical or more science fiction? Because this kind of like this was like a crossover. It's definitely science fiction with a lot of the technology of it, but the fantastical also fit in there with how at least it came across that way. Maybe you consider it only science fiction, what you wrote.
I think it's safe to say I'm kind of a science fantasy person. I try to make it as hard as I can, but there are always elements in my sci-fi that, they would say it's magical, like Star Wars, has the Force.
Yeah.
So like I said, I try to ground it in reality, but I do like to put in elements of religion or elements of, mythology. So I like to mix the two together, or that, that place where science and magic meet. Is kind of what I'm fascinated with.
Yeah. Like Anne McCaffrey, who wrote the Dragon Riders.
Oh, I love Anne McCaffrey.
Yeah. She was one of our judges until she passed, and then her son replaced her, Todd.
Oh yeah, that was neat to be able to hear him speak at the workshop.
Yeah. And she just persisted in her perspective that all she ever wrote was science fiction. All the Dragon Riders at Perm, those were science fiction stories, not fantasy stories. It was grounded in science, the way they arrived there, creating the dragons was through science. So she said, nope, I wrote science fiction. She was very adamant about that. So I've definitely experienced that, and that's totally fine. And there's some authors too who write science fiction, but then they claim a different genre or subgenre just based upon where the audience is that they foresee. Like Michael Crichton only ever wrote science fiction, but he was always sold in general fiction, that type of thing. So in terms of then the types of stories you like to write, do you have any plans with like novels, or are you going to stay with short fiction? What's your plan to do now?
I consider myself a novelist primarily. So I have written like 2 that didn't sell. So I'm working on a third. And that's what I do with most of my time, which is why I'm not a very prolific short story writer. Short stories kind of have to wait for an inspiration for me. But yeah, so my plan is to someday get a novel published, hopefully more than one.
So now you said you've written 2 novels, but they didn't sell. Does that mean you shopped them around and nobody bought them, or you tried? Okay. Because again, I just did an interview with A.G. Riddle, and he's one of the top selling science fiction writers right now with his books on on science fiction. And he went to self-publish line. He went and uploaded on Amazon, the Kindle, and proceeded that way. And it started off slow, but then within about 6 months, he was with his first book, Atlantis Gene, just at that point just exploded and did really well with that. And then the following book, it was a trilogy that he issued all 3 of them within about, I guess, 8 months or something like that he did. But he went through Amazon, the KDP program. So that's another way as well, because the fact is, like, the number of publishers that exist out there used to be the big 5, now it's the big 4. And they'll publish, in terms of new authors, maybe a couple new authors a year. They invest their money in the known and proven, writers there. And if somebody's going to bubble up, like, some of these independently published or self-published authors, then they'll take them and, like The Martian, that went from being self-published to now he's got publishing deals. But I mean, that's a way that can go as well. I don't know if have you looked at that?
I've thought about it. I go back and forth. I think I'm going to try the traditional route a little longer for a couple of reasons. One is I don't feel like I have the time and energy currently to spend on marketing myself. And if you want to self-publish, you really have to be active on social media and, be really actively promoting it. And when I only have so much time in the day, I'd rather spend that writing than, I just don't have enough hours right now. And, I think self-publishing will always be there.
Yeah.
So I think that's always an option where if I feel like, not so much that I've exhausted, the traditional publishing route, but when I feel confident enough in my work that I don't feel like I would need an editor or that external, validation, then I might consider self-publishing. But at the moment, I don't feel like that I'm ready to hustle like that.
Yeah.
That I would need to not have my story just be lost to obscurity.
Right. There's also indie publishing too, not just necessarily going to you mentioned, the thing with Kevin Anderson, because he's got his Wordfire Press that he created. For him, it was a solution to keeping his books in print because he's extremely prolific. And, the regular normal publisher will keep a book 2 years and then it's out of print and that's it. And he had a problem with that. So he worked on getting the rights back and he created his own publishing house, Wordfire Press, first of all, to keep his books in print. And then he started finding other judges for the contest who were in similar straits and started republishing theirs. And now he's been republishing the earlier works of Frank Herbert and other classic authors, just to give them a voice or a way to be able to have their works be able to be sold. So that's something too, I don't know how much of a relationship you built with Kevin or to be able to get to, chatting with him, but he might be somebody that'd be interested at least to start reaching out to if he's interested in doing something with your novels. I don't know what they are, but that's one thing that winners have always had access to, is the judges who are sometimes willing to help them get that next break.
Well, thanks. I hadn't really looked into indie publishing as much. The big thing seems to always be Amazon right now, but I keep forgetting that there are some avenues open to me now that I've won the contest that weren't before.
Exactly.
Now that I made those contacts.
Yeah, Eric Flint's got his own. He won the contest 30 years ago now, and now he's a multiple New York Times bestselling author. Then he's got his own publishing house, which is an imprint under Bain Books. Mm-hmm. So there's, I think we probably got 3 winners that have. Dean Wesley Smith has his own publishing house. So we've got multiple winners now, well-established authors who have their own imprints. That one of the things that they love doing is helping out the contest winners so they can keep on, surviving and doing well as a writer. So, in terms of advice then to the aspiring writer, what were some of your biggest, I guess, up moments or successes, and then some of the things that you really had to overcome that would have, and how you overcame them to continue persisting with writing?
Well, up moments, definitely winning the contest was probably the biggest up moment. I would get, for myself, I would set goals. For example, when I was in high school, I used to read a feeling webzine. And I read a lot of different web scenes. Some of them have survived, most have not. But a feeling is amateur, but my goal at first was to get published there. And the first few things I submitted, I got rejections, and then I was able to finally publish there. And so that was about, a validation. And then I, started to, another goal was to win this contest, which again took like 18 years. But, whenever I think the biggest thing is to learn how to do things, learn how to deal with rejection, and learn how to constructively take criticism. Because I don't think you can grow if you're, if you're stubborn about criticism, if you're not open to it, if you take it personally, then I don't think you can grow as an author. Because if there is, a flaw with your story, and somebody says, hey, your story is not interesting, it gets boring on page 16, or it doesn't get interesting till page 16, it needs to get interesting sooner. Then if you take that personally and as an attack, and I know a lot of authors who do take that personally, then you're going to, never be able to improve that story. And so I think for me as an author, the biggest hurdle was getting from the point of, this is my private inner self that I'm putting onto the page. And if it gets rejected, then that's like a rejection of myself and I can't show anyone. I think getting over that ego was what helped me, get to where I could win the contest or, write something that people actually cared about reading.
Right. Okay, that's good. And that's because that's something that comes up routinely, that somebody doesn't want to submit their story because what if they don't like it, or they've already ruled themselves out of the game without ever even playing the game. And that's really a disservice to the aspiring writer. Did you have any problems submitting stories even at the get-go? No,
I didn't. I always submitted. I had a hard time, learning to get over the rejection at first. It took a long time to where it got to where it didn't sting. And it always is going to sting a little bit because you have that hope that, they're going to love your story and pay you a lot of money for it. But at this point, I feel like I'm more professional about it in that when I get, a rejection back, I can look at it with, I guess, more objective eyes And that it doesn't always mean, scrap the story and start from scratch. Sometimes it means the structure of the story wasn't right. Like I recently got an R&R for a novel, and it was over the structure of it. And so, I can, even though it stings a little, I can take that and I can, start looking at it again and in terms of the craft and seeing what I can do to like fix the story so that it works. Or if not, then, scrap it and move on to the next project.
Right. I think Kevin Anderson used to boast that he had this container he put all of his rejection slips in, and he had over 700 rejection slips as an author, and he still gets rejects. Dean Wesley Smith, who's probably published 200 plus novels and however many thousands of short stories, he still gets rejects. And his wife, Chris Rush, who is probably one of the most successful short story writers out there, still gets rejects. That's just part of the publishing world, And what people don't realize is you can write a story. It's a great story. It's brilliant. But that magazine that you just sent it to just published a story like that, or the same subgenre or the same theme in the last issue. So they're just not looking for that. So they're going to reject it. Nothing to do with your story, but just they're not looking for that. And some people don't look at the reasons why a story might be rejected. It could be nothing whatsoever to do with the story or the quality of the story. They're not looking for that. The other thing too is that you have to really look at what does that magazine publish. Sometimes writers will send something out there, let's just shoot it everywhere, but it's not even what the magazine or that anthology publishes, those types of stories.
Yeah, reading the guidelines is definitely a way you can show respect to the editor. So, I mean, you're not being professional if you're throwing spaghetti at the wall and sending like a horror story to a romance, magazine or, whatever. But I would say still be persistent if you have confidence in a story, because a lot of the rejections I got from Writers of the Future, I sold in semi-pro magazines. And they just probably, like there was one that the very first story I sold for money was not even an honorable mention in Writers of the Future. Because for a long time, like every time I wrote a story, I'd send it to Writers of the Future first. And I'd wait for the rejection before I'd send it to other places. But then the second magazine I sent it to snapped it up right away because it was in their wheelhouse. The editor said, "I love Americana." It was like a coyote myth. And so I think it was just not sci-fi enough for Writers of the Future, but it fit with that magazine. So.
Yeah, Orson Scott Card used to say, this is when he had the Intergalactic Medicine Show magazine that he published. He made a comment. This is one of the interviews I did with him. It's really interesting that I publish what Writers of the Future rejects, so, but he's been a judge for well over 30 years for Writers of the Future, and has been a really strong proponent of it, because, what does make it in there is the best of the best. And that's obviously what you qualify as. But there was one year, a few years ago, that there were 3 werewolf stories. And Dave Farland says, they're all great werewolf stories, but he's not going to buy 3 stories for Rise of the Future. So he took one and he said any one of those could have easily won, but he had to choose between the 3. And that's just one of those things, that happens in short story publishing, and especially the number of entries that the contest gets, because we get thousands every quarter. And it's something that people just need to really learn and know, that you have to persist and keep on submitting. And it is a matter of honing one's craft, which the contest does. And now when people do get an honorable mention, they can put that in their resumes now, and it takes their stories out of slush piles. So now you teach English. Is that what you teach in high school? So how much does I know what they said in the workshop about, if you're an English major, how that affects your writing style, but how do you feel like you approach writing as an English teacher?
Well, I came to teaching English a little bit late. later in life. My background was in political science and law. And when I started getting serious about pursuing writing as a career, I decided to, take the qualifications to become an English teacher, because I figured if I could teach it, then I can probably do it and apply it. And I think it's helped me grow as a writer, because I see a lot of the wrong way to write.
Yeah.
And focus on, helping people helping students improve their writing style. And, I do a lot more reading and analyzation of, stories and literature. And since I wasn't an English major, I hadn't really done that before. And so I think my writing has grown since being a teacher. And I think my grammar has improved slightly, not as much as people would think. But
do you find that you're having traveled all over, all the various states, that's actually improved your bullpen on writing? Or how do you come up with do you rely on your research? Do you then hit the internet or the library, or do you rely also upon your various experiences being the daughter of a military, traveling all over the world?
I definitely rely on my experiences a lot. Even in the Argentum, the main character is a miner, not a child, but somebody who digs up rocks. And I did have to do, extensive research on that. But I spent a lot of time in Nevada and, wandering around the desert, and my dad would take me rock hunting. And so I developed, an interest in geology. And so, there's the experience from that, behind the decision to make her that profession. So, you have to have some experience as a writer or as a person to be able to write. And I think that that's also why I'm okay with not being successful young. I know there's a lot of wonderkins now that, hit it big at age 25, but I feel like the best writers, or the writers I enjoy reading the most, have aged a little bit and have experienced a little bit more of the world. They have a deeper understanding of the human condition. And so that's why, like I said, I'm okay with my success coming a little bit later. I think that I need to earn my way to it.
Yeah, like in your story there, the main character's dad was an engineer by trade and a mythologist at heart. So I wasn't sure how much you pulled from like I said, were you born and raised Buddhist and then maintained that, or that's something that evolved for you? Because you definitely have, you talk about the Bhagavad Gita.
Well, that's Hindu, but
yeah, I know. That's what I'm wondering now, how that.
So the Philippines is a strange mix of cultures and religions. So it's called a Catholic country,
right?
But if you really look at their practices, there's a lot of animism and Buddhist beliefs that are still ingrained. So, I think a Filipino Catholic is very different from, somebody who was born and raised in New York, for example. So I'd say I would have considered myself more Christian as when I was a kid. But it never sat well with me. And so I came to Buddhism a little bit later in life. I still don't practice it. Buddhism is just the easiest way to describe my beliefs. So that's why I tell people. But I think there is a universal truth, and you can, if you really look at the core of a lot of different religions, you can find it. So I think a lot of the rituals and things are just window dressing to comfort us, but there are truths to, a lot of the religions, and all those other differences are just extraneous. So
I get it. So the fact that you've got, there's, like I said, there's just different, your philosophy definitely, as you described earlier on with the loss of your very close friend, that rings throughout the story as an explanation of how that character comes to be there, and then how it ends up in the end of your story. So with your And again, keeping in mind that the people are listening to this, a lot of it are aspiring writers. So on doing your own research or coming up with your various story ideas, what are some of that you found work the best for you?
Well, I took a workshop with Tim Powers several years ago, and one thing he said stuck with me, and that was that when he had a main character and he was trying to develop the character, he thought about, what do I need the character to be to make the story work? So what age, what gender, what race, what religion, what profession do I need the character to be? And so I've started to approach it like that and then do research accordingly. So, my story might start off with, an inspiration, a scene or a dream or something. But then when I'm starting to build the story, I come at it with a little bit more from a technical perspective. And so my advice would be to, study plot, get all the basics down. But then that way, what do I need to add to my inspiration to make this story work, to make it click, to make it resonate with people. And the other thing is, I think that this came from being an English teacher, by the way.
Okay.
I think that stories should have a theme, like a deeper lesson, a deeper meaning, a truth, a universal truth. It should comment on the human condition. And so you can write, a fun adventure story, but the stories that really stay with us are the stories that, touch us in some way, that resonate with some experience that we've had. And so that's the other element that I always try to add to a story. So even though I've got, cool scenes, I've got an atmosphere, I've got a plot, I've got an ending, I've got a main character, but then, what deeper truth do I want to touch on in this story?
Well, that makes sense on that. And I know some authors don't like to go that direction, but sometimes, again, referring back to L. Ron Hubbard on some of what he's had to say about writing science fiction, he said, are we, as science fiction author, are we all philosophers? Because there's a definite sense of commuting some, whether you want to call it a higher truth or some universal truth in a way that someone else can connect with it. Sometimes it's easier when you take a setting that's on a distant planet. I mean, it's exactly happening right now, but when you tell it right now, it's like, okay, they're preaching. But if you put it on another planet, another dimension, or another time, aliens, you don't see the fact that you're just talking about conflicts right now on planet Earth. So you're able to do that with science fiction that you can't otherwise do without seeming like you're trying to preach.
Yeah. And I think science fiction, is a unique genre. I know a lot of people look down on it. When I was in college, I had a literature teacher who was a famous author who, told me, write something true. Don't write that silly Star Trek stuff. But, Star Trek, for example, had the first biracial kiss on screen. They covered a lot of topics. They had this society where they don't use money. How anti-capitalist can you get? So even, the silliest science fiction is imagining a future, and it's either imagining a future that is dark and someplace we don't want to go, and it's a warning to us, or it's a utopia where it's something we can aspire to. And, silly adventure stories give us heroic qualities that, as children we can see and, hopefully emulate, bravery, friendship, loyalty, having a sense of honor. I think that, people who don't read, that's something that sometimes they're lacking. And I think that if you read, silly science fiction stories or fantasy stories as a kid, you usually grow up to be a better person. And so I think as authors, we have kind of a duty to think about those things at least a little bit in our stories. And I think a lot of authors do, even if they say they don't, I think they're still putting it in their stories subconsciously.
I don't think you can avoid it if you're actually once you're connecting and you're actually telling story and not worried about sentence structure and grammar and first person, third person, when you're actually telling story, your own self is going to, well, it'll come out. You can't help but have that because you're now in your own total create on a thing, whether you're on another planet or wherever else. But science fiction kind of gives you a setting where you can safely do that. I know in the golden age, there was a lot of philosophy communicated, but because it was a time period where we just finished World War I, World War II was looming. We had the Spanish flu, the pandemic had nearly wiped out, 50 million people around the world. A lot of people were out of work with the stock market crash. So there was a lot of people that were very concerned, and they needed the escapist fiction, and science fiction was that last part of the pulp fiction era that really grew. And it does do that. It gives one a sense of hope or a warning of what not to do. Both sides of it was actually done very well. But what do you yourself as a writer hope to have achieved or accomplished when you look back and go, I did, accomplish my dream, which was blah?
I think for me, it would just be to be able to tell the stories that I want to tell. And if some people happen to read them, that would be great. I wouldn't say no to a movie deal.
Okay, good. Noted, duly noted. Now, in terms of improving your skills as a writer, what types of things do you do or would you recommend doing for a writer?
Well, things like the online class, the online workshop are great. Another thing I did for many years was go to literary conventions or sci-fi conventions. They usually have panels on writing. And so I tended to go to those. They're also good for networking and meeting people and joining writing groups. So there's like two different kinds of writing groups. And I know some authors don't care for them. So if, it depends on your style. Like if you're somebody who wants to go solo and you've got your process and, then don't mess with it. But I personally like to be able to submit to people. That gives me a goal. Just try not to make submitting to the writing group your only goal. Like the goal should be publishing versus, because for some people, the writing group is enough to get that feeling of, oh, I've been read. And so I've published something and I've accomplished something. I would keep your writing group small. So usually in areas, there's like big writing groups. If you can, usually within those, there's going to be smaller groups of, so that's something that really helped me, was when I met my writing group and then was able to start, seriously like getting them to read. And that was, I think, where I made the step from taking rejection personally to starting to see it as, a stepping stone to improving my story and improving the craft. Because, you're forced to get over the embarrassment. So your writing is no longer this personal, like this is my diary kind of thing. Other people read it and then they tear it apart for you. So you start desensitizing yourself to it. And then that's really, I think a lot of authors are very introverted naturally, and we live in our heads. And so you need to be able to get out there and get in front of people and do that interaction in order to really grow as a writer.
Right. So now we've touched on it, but I'd like to address a little bit more now. So you're a teacher, even though you're on a
hiatus.
Yes. You're a new mom, and then you're a writer with goals to become a novelist, published novelist. How do you juggle your schedules with these things?
Well, before I had a baby, I would write on weekends, and vacations. But I can no longer, go to Starbucks and be caffeinated and listen to my headphones and, get in the zone. So I've been writing when I can. The phone is like a wonderful device. Like this, I wouldn't be able to write if I didn't have a phone, because now I write on Google Docs on my phone in the dark while my baby is, nursing. So, or napping. And so that's mainly when I've found time. And I wrote the 24-hour story that way. So
it works.
It works. It's not the easiest, and your thumbs will cramp.
Yeah.
But it's not forever. So.
Right. And then I guess you haven't had to do this yet. So when you were as a teacher, then you said you did it on the weekends. You're writing the weekends, and you handled your school work and grading papers, whatnot, during the weekdays.
Mm-hmm. I tried to anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So on, in terms of now, again, we're talking about people that are interested in becoming a writer themselves. So when did you first start writing? Was it elementary school, or where you became like addicted, or at least drawn to the muse of writing?
Oh yeah, I was basically, since I could write, hold a crayon. I think I wrote my first story when I was in first grade or something, and it was about this oak tree that we had in the yard, and the landlord cut it down because it was, scraping the roof. And I just sat there and like cried over it. And then I wrote a story about it called The Old Oak Tree, where this girl saves this tree in a field from developers by chaining herself to it. And then everybody says, "Oh, this girl loves the tree. Let's spare the tree. We should, treasure the environment." So I was also going to elementary school in California at the time, and we were doing a unit on the rainforest and saving the rainforest. So that could have been where some of that inspiration came. But yeah, I used to write fanfic, I guess, before I knew what it was, where I would, I'd keep all these journals, and then I would, if I liked a book, I would, imagine myself or in the book, or I'd imagine, sequel stories to the books, and I'd write them down. And, obviously those will never see the light of day. Luckily the internet wasn't around back then. Otherwise they would be out there.
Yes.
But I guess people don't really get embarrassed about that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I see. How do you see now that, like, you brought up a good point here, like you have the internet, and which exists now, but it didn't exist when you first started. Any words of any cautionary tales or words of wisdom you care to share about how one creates himself, or how one involves themselves with the internet? Yeah,
I think if you're like me and you started out writing very young, I think there's this sense that the internet is anonymous, but I think it's very easy to figure out who people are. Like there's people out there that are very good at that. And so you don't want anything out there that wouldn't reflect well on you later. Like if you would be embarrassed to buy it, in 2 days or in 2 years or in 2 decades, try not to post it, because it won't go away.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you just think about it's hard to have perspective when you're younger, but it's just, this phase of your life won't be forever. And so I think, what I tell my students when they're applying to colleges is, colleges look at your social media. They'll look at, whatever website. High school kids don't usually have Facebook anymore. But, they'll look you up, they'll Google you. Mm-hmm. And if you have pictures that show that you will not be a credit to the university, or you're going to damage their reputation, then they're going to move on to the next qualified student. Same with employers do that. And so if you're wanting to become an author with fans, then obviously you don't want to do anything that's going to turn fans off. Mm-hmm. Or, make you hated. So, be kind to others, and just treat people on the internet like you would in person. Right. Like if, don't be a troll, or be really like bullying somebody because you think it's anonymous. Like just,
it gets found out. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what you say now can and will be used against you 10 years down the road on social media, because the social media's internet's forever.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away. So I guess, so you've been submitting since you were a youth, and now you're a new mom, and you still have plenty of runway left for you, to really build up a major career, as a writer. Any thoughts to, I guess, somebody who wants to be a writer, because you've gone through. So yours is a great story, which is why I was really anxious to be able to do this interview with you, coming from, the Philippines, these other countries, having experience being, a daughter of military, and progressing through, 2 decades almost of submitting this contest. What would you recommend to others like yourself, whether they are young moms or they've got a career going and they feel like I can't do anything to jeopardize that because this gives me my, I've got my roof over my head now because of my job, any particular advice or thoughts about that?
I think the biggest one is just to not give up or get discouraged. I mean, don't compare yourself to other people. You always hear success stories of authors who they were like, oh, well, I was starving. And then, but then I wrote and I locked myself in the basement and I wrote, and then I hit it big. And some of us can't take those risks. If you have a family, then you can't quit your job and, go, whose basement are you going to, sit in? And
most of those stories are most of those stories are fantasy as well.
Exactly. Like, you don't know the truth of it. Like,
right.
Maybe his parents paid the rent so that he could become an author, or maybe he was working a full-time job and just that sounded better than that. So, I mean, you can carve out time of your day. Think of it as, for me, like writing is relaxation time. But at the same time, so sometimes it does get put to the back burner, unfortunately, which, if it was making money, it might not. But at the same time, like, you do have to prioritize, just like you would schedule time to go to the gym and take care of yourself. Like, you want to take care of your mental health. So if writing is something that gives you pleasure, then, carve out time for that and make it a priority, and just, keep at it. Again, don't get discouraged, even if it takes a long time. Like, I'm almost 40 years old and I'm finally won this contest. And I don't intend to stop anytime soon.
Right.
So, I don't think age is any measure of success for writing. Like, you don't need to be able to run a mile in a certain number of minutes. As long as your fingers still work, I think you can, and your mind still works, I think you can write. Yeah.
I mean, this year at the workshop, we had the youngest winner. She won when she was 16 years old. Now she's 17. And then we had someone who's 67, so it's, and he was hopeful that there's going to be some type of development vaccine, so that when he's hits 83, which is that point where it says that's your lifespan, that there'll be another injection he can take, which keeps it going beyond that, so he can keep on building his career as a writer. Now, in terms of family life, as a writer, as an aspiring writer, does your husband help open things up or make things possible for you to continue your writing? Is he supportive?
Yes, he's supportive of, if he hadn't been supportive of me coming to the workshop, it wouldn't have happened. Honestly, because he had to take off work and come to help watch the baby. And then my mother as well came. So I do have a lot of family support, and he's always encouraged me. He reads my novels when they're finished and gives me feedback. So I think having a supportive family is important, because, if it's a hard thing to justify spending time on, because you hear the statistics and as far as like who makes money at it and whatever. But so, one word from a spouse or family member saying like, well, you're being selfish, why are you wasting time on that, would, I think, kill a lot of people's. But, do it for yourself. I mean, if it's something you want to do, then just do it. I mean, there's nothing stopping you but your own mindset on it.
Right. Which brings up one other point that I just wanted to finish off this interview with, is surrounding yourself with positive, with people who are positive, and remove the negativity from your environment as much as possible. How much do you feel that that's a factor in a successful career in creative arts?
I think it kind of depends on where you draw your inspiration from. You hear tales of authors feeding off the drama and getting, their inspiration from that drama. I'm not like that. When I get stressed out, I don't produce,
right.
Writing. Or if I get depressed, I can't write. So I think taking care of your mental health as a writer is important as well. Like, how do you expect your mind to work if you're in distress, right? So same with, like, if you're hungry, you're not going to be able to write well. If your mind is not, at peace, you won't be able to write well either. So I think definitely looking after your mental health and being in a positive environment is important.
Agreed. So as we wrap this up now, so do you have anything that's in the works or that we're going to look forward to seeing coming from you in the next little bit?
I think I'm going to try to polish up my 24-hour story and submit it. I won't say much about it, but basically it's a murder mystery with aliens.
Well, there you go. So for anybody listening on this right now, this is Anj Dockrey, and her story, The Argentum, is published in Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future, Volume 37. And for those of you young mothers or single parents or family with a new child, this gives you another perspective of how you can successfully navigate and things work for you to be able to pursue your muse with writing or whatever muse you choose to pursue. So your social media where somebody can find you or to connect up with you is?
It's on, I have a Wix page. So it's anjdockrey.wixsite.com.
Good. And that's where they can find out more about you and who you are and your stories that you've written.
Yes.
That's great. So thank you very much, Anj. It's been great having this opportunity to talk with you. I was originally trying to do it while we're still here at the workshop, but it just got crazy there at the end with so much happening. So it's been great being able to speak with you. Like I said, yours was a story I was looking forward to share with our listeners.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Anj.
Thank you.